Welcome to Life Plus. I'm Audrey Galex. In this episode, we're going to be talking about an issue that hits close to home for so many of us, Alzheimer's disease. There are nearly 6 million people living with the disease, and according to the Alzheimer's Association, by the year 2050, that number will rise to 14 million. Well, it took this piece of paper for it to sink in that my mother will also be facing a challenge of living with Alzheimer's disease. So unbelievable, somebody so vibrant, so full of life. Well, in this episode of Life Plus, you'll meet a couple who are facing Alzheimer's and helping lead the fight for treatment as well as a cure. Meet Dan and Denise Goerke.
Photos around Denise Goerke's room share memories of times past, good times, family. There are letters of love and encouragement, but mostly there is this hand, belonging to one who knows her well, who loves her, who is devoted to her.
Who is Denise? Wow. How long do you have? Denise is just a vibrant person. Ever since, she was a little kid, she was always wanting to do something. She was dragging her brothers out of the house to go play, take part in whatever activity she was doing. She is very much a tomboy, okay? She would get in fights with the neighborhood boys, and always a person looking for the next fun thing to do. And it just seemed like that was Denise. She would walk in a room, the room would light up, people would want to go talk to her. And she was always planning on, again, whatever that next fun activity was.
Always up for fun, Denise was a competitive swimmer. That's how Denise and Dan met. She loves the beach, loves art.
What brings joy to your life?
You. Life Plus first introduced you to Denise and Dan Goerke in 2015. Then, as now, they wanted to share their story to help others.
So Denise was diagnosed in October 2012, and the disease progressed really fast, and I think that's been one of the biggest shocks and challenges is that as a caregiver, I was having to learn something new every day. Something new would pop up where she'd want to do something that just wasn't safe, or keep repeating something, and then her condition would decline, and you'd have to play catch up.
The signs were subtle at first, things many of us do.
Most of the early signs revolved around memory. She would forget where her keys were. She'd forget where her glasses, she wore glasses all the time. She would lose those. She would lose sunglasses. She would lose credit cards, leave them like at a restaurant. We'd have to go back. She started to lose her way around town. And she was in a job where she had to drive, and she would just get confused. And it wasn't necessarily that it happened one time per week. It was a repeated instances of those memory issues.
But things with Denise began to shift rapidly, unexpectedly.
And finally, what kind of pushed me over the edge that we needed to do something was that she was staying up all night to do her business plan for work. And she did this 2 or 3 times, and then the last time I looked, before I went to bed, 11, 12 o'clock at night, I looked at what she was doing. I came out the next morning at 6, and she's still sitting at the table, and I looked, and she was on the exact same thing, and she had a pencil, and she was erasing it, and doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I said, we got to stop. Something is more seriously wrong than you just not being able to concentrate. And so that's when we started going to doctors to get it diagnosed.
According to the Alzheimer's Association, memory loss that disrupts daily life is one of 10 early signs to watch for. Though forgetting names or appointments, but remembering them later is not a sign. Challenges in planning or solving problems is another sign. Some people may experience changes in their ability to develop and follow a plan or work with numbers. Difficulty completing familiar tasks at home, at work, or at leisure may be a warning signal, like forgetting how to drive to a familiar location, forgetting the rules to a favorite game. Confusion with time or place is another sign. People with Alzheimer's may forget where they are or how they got there. Another factor to watch: trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. They may have trouble judging distance, determining color or contrast, and have difficulty reading. Another sign: new problems with words in speaking or writing. For instance, people with Alzheimer's may have trouble joining or following a conversation. Misplacing things, putting things in unusual places, and losing the ability to retrace steps are other signs to watch for. Decreased or poor judgment is another. They may pay less attention to personal hygiene and use poor judgment with money. People with Alzheimer's may withdraw from work or social activities. They may also exhibit changes in mood and personality. Amy Johnston is Senior Director of Communications with the Alzheimer's Association Georgia Chapter.
Our calls increase around Christmas and Thanksgiving, around the holidays, because people haven't seen their grandparents in a year, and their grandparents might be showing some symptoms that might be, a little bit different. And so it's about paying attention to your family members and your coworkers, and having those conversations. Alzheimer's definitely does not discriminate. Basically, if you have a brain, you are at risk for Alzheimer's. There are over 140,000 people in the state of Georgia who are living with Alzheimer's, and another 527,000 caregivers. Across the country, there are over 5 million people living with Alzheimer's. And that number is expected to increase, actually triple, by the year 2050.
One reason: baby boomers, people born between 1946 and 1964, are turning 65 at the rate of 10,000 a day. But Denise Goerke was diagnosed with a rare form, early-onset Alzheimer's.
Yeah, the diagnosis was tough. Harder on me than her, if you can believe that. We were sitting in the office, and he just said, he got the test results, and he said, it's Alzheimer's. And we talked to another doctor to verify the results. He said yes. And, I say to people, I was still sitting there with my jaw on the floor, couldn't believe it. And Denise is like literally standing up and said, well, okay, what's next? What's meds? What meds do I take? She walked out of the doctor's office. There was a rack of literature on Alzheimer's outside of the doctor's office. She's leafing through, grabbing every document, every flyer that she could find on the disease, and said, let's go.
But taking the next steps proved difficult.
It was very tough once we got home from that diagnosis. We sat and talked a lot at the kitchen table, and I knew I had to learn things about what she wanted, because I knew that she would be losing her ability to express those things. So we talked about what travel plans, where did she want to go in the world, who she wanted to visit her, and she said right off the bat, my brothers and sisters. We talked about, do you want to take on any renovation projects at the house? And then we got into the meatier issues of, we know where this is going. What do you want at the end? She wants to be comfortable, buried or cremated. She wanted to be cremated. And at the end of all of that, I said to her, what's your biggest fear with this disease? And this woman I'd known for 20 years cried only once during that 20-year period. She immediately broke down and cried. And she said, it's when the disease gets really bad and I've forgotten my kids' names that they stop coming to see me. And I could never forget that. And it just killed me to hear that. And I reassured her that wouldn't happen, okay? And it hasn't. But yet that was just so devastating to hear that.
And they reassured each other they would fight to raise awareness and funding for a cure, lobbying in Washington, getting involved in the Alzheimer's Association. But that's not all.
Hi folks, this is my continuing video blog about Alzheimer's disease and our journey with the disease. And so I started doing a video blog, which I put up on Facebook, and that was inspired mainly because of the fact that I heard so many people shocked to learn that Denise at 56 had the disease, where most people think that it's grandma or mom's disease, someone in their 70s or 80s, which it is for most people. But there's 5% of the cases are people under 65. And so many people were just shocked at that. I said, well, I got to tell people. And it kind of started as a blog to let people know that it is a younger person's disease as well. And then just some of the ins and outs of what happens, what to expect, and what you can't expect. There are so many more things. And it was just more of an educational process. Now I have people saying, how's Denise doing? Can we see Denise when I do the video blog? and that's just that awareness factor is so important to me, and that's why I'm out there, and Denise has been out there with me, making people more aware of what the disease is about.
The Goerkes also want to erase the stigma surrounding Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia.
I relate this disease back to what cancer was in the 60s and 70s, when it was the C word. No one would discuss it. No one would say, that's what I have. Now, everybody knows. You want people to know because you want that support around you as well. And people, for the most part, don't have a qualm about saying, I have cancer. Well, dementia or Alzheimer's is totally different. People are still very hesitant about saying that they have it. And I think until we can get to that point where people aren't so hesitant and people are coming out and saying it more and more, I think that disease is going to still be, pardon my phrasing, but in the back of people's minds and not on the forefront. And until we can get it on the forefront, we're going to struggle with finding a cure. Yeah, I think people are afraid of being portrayed as maybe dumb or less than who they were, because you truly do lose the essence of who you are. You lose your mental capacity in terms of forgetfulness. You can't remember names. You can't remember how to do a checkbook, how to balance a checkbook, do the finances. And so I think there's a stigma about people looking at you and saying, boy, he's dumb. Or there's a major problem. And so I think people are afraid of that. Denise was, on the other hand, so out there with it. I remember being at the grocery store and she wanted to pay for our groceries and the cashier said, here's what the amount is. And she was fumbling around for her card and she would say to the cashier, I'm sorry, I have Alzheimer's. Could you tell me what the amount is again? And I just love that about her. And so I'm hopeful more and more people start talking about it, and so we can get this disease behind us.
When Life Plus returns, we'll continue our conversation about Alzheimer's. We'll also be talking about brain health, and you'll meet a stellar senior. Stay with us. Welcome back to Life Plus. I'm Audrey Galex. In this segment of our program, you'll hear some pearls of wisdom, meet a stellar senior. But first, we continue our conversation about Alzheimer's with tips on heart and brain health.
Basically, what's good for your heart is good for your brain. According to the Alzheimer's Association, adopting healthy lifestyle habits can help reduce the risk of cognitive decline. So, Break a sweat. Participate in exercise that raises your heart rate and increases the blood flow to your heart and brain. Exercises like biking, running, and even brisk walking. Hit the books. Consider taking a class at a local college. Remember, in Georgia at age 62, you can audit classes for free at state colleges. Quit smoking. No buts about it. Address the risk factors for cardiovascular disease and stroke, like obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes, because they can affect your brain health. Again, what's good for your heart is good for your brain. And don't forget to protect your head from injury. Wear a seatbelt, use a helmet when you play contact sports, rollerblade, or ride a bike. Take steps to prevent falls. Eat a healthy, balanced diet that's low in fat and higher in vegetables and fruit. Catch some Z's, get enough sleep. Don't ignore your mental and emotional health. Some studies link a history of depression to an increased risk of cognitive decline. Try to manage your stress and anxiety too. Stay socially active and find ways to connect to your community. Volunteer, sing with a choir, dance with friends. Challenge your mind, do something artistic. Do jigsaw or crossword puzzles, play games, learn a new language. And for those who are caregivers, take extra care of yourself and reach out for help. Amy Johnston is with the Alzheimer's Association Georgia chapter.
We have a 24/7 hotline where you can call at 3 o'clock in the morning or at 12 o'clock on Christmas Day. It doesn't matter. On the other end of that phone is a trained specialist that can help you with pretty much anything. When I was going through this with my father, I did not know about the Alzheimer's Association. I feel like had I known, I would have definitely called that number, because there are moments where you just don't know what to do. I mean, with someone who has dementia, for example, my dad kept asking me the same question over and over and over again, and it was frustrating. But I knew that if I would have called that number, they would have walked me through it and told me exactly how to handle the situation.
Someone told me early on that this is a disease of the caregiver. It's not a disease of the patient. And I still remember in my mind saying, no, you got that wrong. This is definitely about Denise. It's not about me. And I also vividly remember a year later saying, oh my gosh, this is about me. So I wish I had that recognition earlier on that it truly is about the caregiver. And that is because it is such a strange dynamic, you would expect that the patient is the one that has the most difficulty, whereas it's the caregiver, because we see that loved one who is so brilliant, so dynamic, all of a sudden start fading away, and I've got to take on all these responsibilities. It was and still is the most incredibly difficult and stressful thing I have ever done. So to that point, reach out to friends, reach out to family, reach out to an organization like the Alzheimer's Association that runs support groups. Get involved in a support group. Some of my best friends today are people that I met through the support groups, and we call each other, how you doing? And keep track of what's going on with us. So, and take care of yourself physically too. I did that for a while, and unfortunately the disease became so oppressive that I had to drop the working out, any physical activity I was doing. Whatever, and don't be ashamed to rely on comfort foods. Ice cream was great. I call it my C team, Cabernet and caffeine. Okay, so those help in moderation, of course, and also having people come in and giving you help. That's one of the things that I have to call out men on, especially. We're big, strong, we can handle this disease. I remember saying to myself, I can handle this. And you can't. You can't alone. You need help. You need people come in to give you relief, and so you can get a break from the disease.
And the stakes are high. Study after study shows caregivers often jeopardize their own health.
I think one of the biggest things that has helped me through that process is to have family. Our kids are nearby. They come and visit and help. She is one of 8 kids in her family, and they have all come. None of them live here in Atlanta. They all live far, far away. Yet they have taken the time to come and visit her. And during that process where Denise was at home still, they would come very regularly and give me respite weekends. So they would spend the weekend with Denise in the house and kick me out, and I'd go somewhere else to get a break. And I couldn't believe what a big relief that just 2 days meant. It was just incredible. And so there are a lot of little things that you got to do to take care of yourself as a caregiver, which a lot of people don't realize with this disease. It is a disease like no other. And it's so tough on the caregiver because you're having to really assume control of every facet of your lives. And especially with someone, with a spouse, where you're used to doing things, sharing responsibilities, sharing planning. It's all of a sudden that dynamic changes, that I'm doing everything. From planning doctor's visits to medications to trips, who's coming to visit, things like that. What do we do about finances? It all falls on me. And that was one of the most stressful things that I had going on during this journey. It's a journey like no other. I tell people, boy, if I've gotten through this, I can get through anything. So I'd like to think I've grown from it and become a better person of it. But yet, again, it's a disease where people should reach out for help. Yeah.
In our next segment, meet Gedalia Genin. She's an Ayurvedic healer and author of the book, Enough Drugs, I Am a Woman and Can Heal Naturally, a practical guide to feeling your best. I had a chance to interview her about navigating life and loss and healing.
Because to heal and to become whole is truly accepting and experiencing those feelings as well, and allowing them to move you into different practices. Like for me, my grief led me to paint and to do art. You know, it's kind of like a distraction, and it's almost like a bath for the mind when you sort of, distract yourself with painting or writing and color, but yet it empties the mind, and it empties you of your story. So, and it's also just very healing.
Well, tell us a little bit about your story. You said you were experiencing some grief at the time and turned to painting. What happened?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was actually when I started meditating, which was in 1990. And when I started meditating, I was very drawn to color, to painting, and to the healing arts. And that's really how it all started. And so through the painting, I just found this way of getting out of my story. And in fact, when I started to paint mandalas, which are these round symbols of healing that are used in different cultures and religions around the world. And a mandala is a symbol of wholeness, and I write about it a little bit in the book, in the creativity chapter. And just seeing these mandalas and drawing these mandalas, can bring you back into this state of wholeness where you integrate the feelings rather than think you just have to let them go or go beyond them. They actually become a part of who you are. you know.
And I'm thinking when I think of a mandala, I think of something that's very repetitive, using the same colors, using the same shapes. Is that something also that appears to be useful in healing?
Yeah, sometimes they're the same colors and shapes, and sometimes you're given just an empty circle to draw in. And so both are very effective.
So interesting, I think of a mandala, and I also then think of a labyrinth, or not necessarily a maze, but really more of a labyrinth, where there is that circular motion of the body or of the hand or of the, using a brush or whatever,
Yes,
way you're adding
absolutely.
color.
And walking a labyrinth is that meditative experience of walking into the center, that center where you feel whole, where everything is okay. And so both of those are very effective tools for healing and wholeness.
She credits, in part, her grandmother for inspiring her.
What I realized after I had my first son, Zach, and returned to more of a holistic, or began more of a holistic way of living, was that I modeled a lot of my life after my grandmother, who came to this country, not speaking English, Russian, in New York City, filleting fish at the Fulton Street Fish Market. And, she made bone broths every day. She roasted chickens. She made cooked fruit. She didn't have digestive problems. She didn't have, mental health problems. She walked to get her food every day. I mean, this is not to say that women belong in the kitchen all day, but her lifestyle inspired me to cook healthy food and to use daily rhythms to be a part of my life, to enjoy walking to get food, to enjoy walking into town.
And finally, words of wisdom, inspired by Denise Goerke, shared by her husband, Dan.
One instance I can think of was we were in traffic going through the downtown connector, and I looked over and saw some guy weaving in and out of traffic. And I made some statement like, "Oh, what an idiot that guy is." Denise's perspective on it was, she goes, "Well, maybe there's somebody in his back seat that needs to get to the hospital." And again, it kind of stopped me, and I thought, well, you might be right. And that's such a calm way, maybe, of looking at that kind of situation, rather than being angry at somebody. And that was just Denise's perspective. It came out of nowhere, and just something you wouldn't expect.
Thanks so much for joining us on another edition of AIB's Life Plus. I'm Audrey Galex. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Go to AIBTV.com/donate to support programming like this. All contributions are tax deductible.